Shalom, Bethel family. It's Thursday time once again to talk about our Torah discussion from last Saturday here at Congregation Bethel in Norfolk, Virginia. 2 weeks ago was the Shabbat before Father's Day, and so I spoke about the separation of children and parents. It didn't seem that I could let Father's Day pass knowing what was going on then. But really, in the summer, what we try and do as programming calms down and we're able to focus a little bit more in this period leading up ultimately to the high holidays, so we try and focus in a little bit more on spiritual life and the life of the Spirit. And this year, we've been doing that by taking certain prayers and ideas and analyzing them and getting really deep into them and trying to spiritually connect with them at a deeper level. And so we started our conversation this past Shabbat. We were talking about the Shabbat Amidah, and more importantly, the Musaf Amidah. And the question was, why do we need this Musaf Amidah? Why do we do two Amidahs on Saturday morning, and what is this Musaf, this additional service, supposed to be? Of course, it's representative of the Musaf offering, the Musaf sacrifice that was made in the temple in the time of the temple for Shabbat and really all holidays, including the new month for Rosh Chodesh. But the temple doesn't exist anymore, and we don't make these sacrifices. So why do we need a Musaf service to commemorate an animal sacrifice? To be quite frank, most of us don't really want to go back to worshiping that way anyway. So what is the idea of this Musaf? To try and figure it out, we tried to understand a little bit more about Shabbat itself. To do so, we used the classic work on Shabbat, Abraham Joshua Heschel's The Sabbath. And we discussed one quote from The Sabbath, and where it says, "The difference between the Sabbath and all other days is not to be noticed in the physical structure of things, in their spatial dimension. Things do not change on that day. There is only a difference in the dimension of time, in the relation of the universe to God. The Sabbath preceded creation and the Sabbath completed creation. It is all of the Spirit that the world can bear." So it's just a beautiful, beautiful quote. But when we read Heschel, we really have to unpack a little bit what he says. It's very easy to read, be caught up in the beauty of the words, but not really understand what it is exactly that we've read. So we focused in particularly on the line, the Sabbath preceded creation and the Sabbath completed creation. It is all of the Spirit that the world can bear. So we discussed, what does it mean that it preceded creation and completed creation? There are several interesting ideas given. The idea that rest, right? Everything was at rest before the activity of creation. Then there's creation, and then God stopped creating and things were at rest again. But that there's a greater cosmic idea to that these moments of rest, that we are required between work to take moments of rest. Suggestions were made that it's time to ideate, right? That we can't know what it is that we are about to do without having that downtime to let things crystallize, right? And even for God, that the Sabbath before creation was when God had the idea, laid out the plans of creation, and then created, and then again paused for rest once again. Another idea was a sense of gathering of energy that's able to happen with a Sabbath, with rest. That before creation there was this gathering of potential energy, and then finally the release of that into kinetic energy. And so too after creation, at least not for God obviously, but for us, that requirement then to regroup and regather our energy. It's a great, wonderful idea about what Shabbat is. And then he goes on, Heschel, to say in that same sentence, it is all of the Spirit that the world can bear. Right? That this moment in time, this gathering of energy, this planning time, that is actually, in fact, when the Spirit happens. It's not in the motion and the creation, the hustle and bustle, but it's that pause in which all of Spirit happens, and it's all the Spirit that the world can bear. And we have this Shabbat, one day every week, where we have that same Spirit, a moment that we create in time, not in the physical dimension, but in the dimension of time. And that brings us to the first Amidah that we say on Shabbat. right? So Heschel, in his work The Sabbath, refers to Shabbat as a palace in time, right? It's a palace in time. So the way my Chavruta, Rabbi Joshua Ben Gideon, when he was sort of actually, a lot of these are his ideas, and he was explaining it to me. It's like we go through every week doing everything we do, and everything's mundane, and then all of a sudden we're going along, and we come up to the Shabbat, and it's like we're walking by this totally mundane landscape, and then suddenly there's this beautiful, gorgeous palace, right? Beautiful, gorgeous palace. And of course, we need to recognize that the palace is there, because we all go through most of every week with our eyes down, trudging through our stuff. Who knows all the beautiful things, even as magnificent as a palace, that we may be missing as our heads are down? So the first thing about really appreciating Shabbat is to recognize the Shabbat. And that's what this first Amidah is about. Right now, the Musaf and the Shachrit, the morning Amidah, are basically the same. The first one, the one in the morning, the difference is right here. It says, with love you have given Shabbat to the people Israel, the descendants of Jacob, whom you have chosen. Right? With love you've given the Shabbat. Right? The first Amidah, this morning Amidah, is just that Shabbat exists. Right? That you gave us this palace. Right? That we recognize that this palace is here, this opportunity to rest and to relax and to regroup our energy, our spiritual energy, and our physical energy. And then it goes on, the people who sanctify the seventh day shall feel fulfilled and shall delight in your goodness, for you yourself were pleased with the seventh day and sanctified it, calling it the most beloved of days, a symbol of the work of creation. Now that piece is identical in the Musaf service, more or less. And then it goes on, our God and God of our ancestors, embrace our rest, make us holy through your mitzvot, and let the Torah be our portion. Fill our lives with your goodness and gladden us with your deliverance. Purify our hearts to serve you truly. Adonai, our God, lovingly and willingly grant that we inherit the holy Shabbat, that the people, Israel, who make your name holy, may find rest on this day. Blessed are you, Lord our God, Mikadesh HaShabbat, who blesses the Shabbat. That whole ending part is exactly the same in the Shachari and the Musaf. So the Shachari starts out, the morning Amidah, with love you have given us Shabbat to the people Israel. So we have this beautiful palace, right? But of course, if you're walking along and you come to this beautiful palace, it's not really useful unless what? Unless you go in it, right? Unless you recognize it's there and go in it. And maybe not only go into it, but bring into it, fill that sacred space with that which is yours, right? If you inherit a palace, but it's an empty palace, then it's not going to do you a lot of good. How will you furnish the palace, as my Chavruta, Rabbi Joshua Ben Gideon, asked the question? And that's what the Musaf service is about, right? That one difference. The Musaf paragraph starts, those who observe Shabbat and call it a delight shall rejoice in your sovereignty. You hear that difference? Right? The first one is, with love you have given Shabbat to the people Israel. That's what God gives us. God gives us the Shabbat. But in the Musaf, the additional piece, those who observe Shabbat and call it delight shall rejoice in your sovereignty. Right? That's what we bring to the Shabbat. And that's what Musaf is about. Right? We haven't completed our Shabbat, not only until we recognize the palace in time, but once we furnish the palace, right, with what we bring to it. Our Shabbat observances, whether that's coming to synagogue, or having Friday night dinner, or being strictly Shomer Shabbat, not using electricity, say, or driving, refraining from work, putting away our smartphones, right, which turn out, who knew, not to be all that smart, and certainly not to make us all that smart. Ultimately, the Musaf of Shabbat is the key point. Right? God gives us Shabbat no matter what. But we only can appreciate it. We only get the benefit of it when we do something additional, when we bring something additional. That's what Musaf means, additional to Shabbat. And so our challenge over this summer and really ongoing as we explore these spiritual ideas, as we try and unlock the keys to these prayers, the key to Musaf is, what am I bringing to Shabbat? How am I changing my routine to make Shabbat holy? The day may be holy because that's how God created it, but it's only holy for me when I go inside, when I bring my furnishings, when I bring something to it, and when I make it special. And I hope that Shabbat can have that special nature for all of us. I hope you'll come to synagogue. It's always beautiful and special in synagogue. I hope you'll make Friday night dinner and light Shabbat candles and continue on a journey of bringing more and more observances, more and more furnishings to this palace that we call Shabbat, so that we can all rejoice together on that day. Wish you a Shabbat Shalom.